Okay, so like the title says, this chapter is about interacting systems. And from a biological perspective, so I'll give you an example. I just thought of this. So if you live in a desert environment, if a plant grows in a desert environment, its structure and adaptations are different than a plant growing in a forest environment, in an environment where there's lots of water. Okay? If you're growing on the side of a hill, the tree has to be different. What does it have to be different? What would
Stronger root system.
stronger root system? Okay, so you adapt to your environment. Okay. All right. So living organisms evolve and adapt to make most of their interactions with their environment. Okay. So a plant living underwater, structurally, it doesn't have to be as strong. Okay, and we'll see why. Yeah, do you guys know why?
Because it's not being beat up with the sun or harsh winds.
All right, so we'll learn this. So let's say you go stand on a scale. What happens? Gravity pulls you down. Okay, and so if the scale doesn't want you going through it, so it pushes you back. Okay, this is your apparent weight. The push of the scale. So right now the ground is pushing me up. That is my apparent weight. Okay, so the earth pulls me with a force of 165 pounds. So the scale is pushing me up with a force of 165 pounds. All right, now let's say I do the same experiment underwater. I go under the pool and now stand on the scale. What is the earth doing to me?
It's just pulling you down.
It's still pulling me down. The earth never gives up. Gravity never quits.
But the gravitational force in water is less, so.
No, it's not.
It's not less?
It's exactly the same.
But there's buoyancy.
There is buoyancy. Okay, so the water, because the pressure increases with depth, we'll get to that eventually, pushes me up. And this buoyant force is almost 165 pounds. Okay, the net force on me has to be zero. The earth is pulling me down. This is pushing me up, the water. So now the scale is not pushing me up at all. The push of the scale is almost zero. My apparent weight is zero. So if I lived underwater, I wouldn't need a strong skeleton. Okay? My structure would be totally different. These guys don't have to have too much cellulose. Okay, so your environment determines what your structure and so on are. Okay? All right, so that's what we are going to learn for plants and animals that live in water. They have profoundly different body plans and structures. So one of our goals is understanding the constraints the physical environment place on us and how we adapt to them. Okay? So for instance, if you're a single-cell animal and you're living in water, the biggest physical feature that you face is viscosity of water. Okay? So the motion of a swimming paramecium is dominated by viscous drag forces. What does viscosity mean?
Thickness of the fluid.
Right, it's okay, so the friction exerted by the fluid. So if you were a paramecium living in water, it's like you trying to swim in honey.
I can barely swim in water.
That's right. All right, so that would be, so if you want to go from place to place, okay, remember we talked about this, how do paramecium get food? Diffusion. You just have to go to a place where the density is higher and you're diffusing. If you want to poop, what do? You go to a place
Diffuse it.
and diffuse it. Everything is diffusion. Okay, so you have to move to, if you have to move, then you have to swim. Okay, and you got to flap like crazy. The minute you stop flapping, you're not moving. Okay. All right, so the next few slides we'll talk about this. So let me start off by showing you a graph here. This is a pretty interesting graph. Okay, so let's see what this graph says. This is energy consumption, rate of energy consumption, okay, versus speed. So here's a kangaroo that hops, and here's an animal that walks and runs. Okay, and you can see that, you know, at higher speed, hopping is more efficient than running. And what else does this graph say? At lower speeds, running is more efficient than hopping. Okay, what do you do? Do you hop or run or walk? No. Okay, so here, see all this efficiency? Why the heck are you walking? Why didn't you learn to hop? You guys understand?
Societal norms?
Huh?
Societal
No,
norms?
no.
Just how we're built.
Yeah, but you're built to be the most efficient for your environment. So, yeah, go ahead.
Do you really think that people, I just lost the word, are adapting to their environment? Humans adapt to their environment, or do we adapt our environment to?
Oh, no, we adapt. Now, well,
Is it possible that somewhere along the lines of evolution, we could have thought, well, hopping would be more efficient, but somebody thought walking was more attractive, so we went that direction, or
no,
whatever.
no. Okay, so here's the answer. We spend most of our lives here, so walking is more efficient. It turns out that walking is more versatile as well. Hopping is good for flat terrain. Okay. This guy adapted to hop because he lives in Australia, large open fields, large open land. Food is sparse. You want to eat, you might have to go 20 miles. Okay, so you had to be efficient to be able to travel far.
And if you want to get away from the freaky animals that exist in Australia.
So that was what was driving. We spend most of our lives here. Okay, the 3 times a lion will chase you, you're willing to spend that extra energy. Okay. In fact, when kangaroos walk, so at slow speed they'll switch to walking than hopping. Okay, so walking is more versatile. It's you can handle varied terrains with that. Okay? And at slow speeds, which is where we spend most of our lives, that's more efficient. So here's a great example. Okay, so let's look at this in a little detail. So to adapt to that, they have exceptionally long tendons. Okay? Now here's a feature about the tendons. Tendons are like rubber bands. What can rubber bands do?
Stop.
Huh?
Stop.
They can snap. You stretch them, they store energy, and then when you let them go, they'll give that energy back. Okay? So tendons can store energy. Okay? They have exceptionally long and strong tendons, Achilles tendons in their hind legs. These tendons act like elastic bands storing energy. The tendons recycle up to 90% of the energy each hop. Okay, so when the kangaroo, after a jump, as it lands, the tendon stretches, and on the next jump, all that energy is given back. 90% of the energy is given back. And that's how come it's so efficient in even at high speeds, okay? Evolution favored this because kangaroos had to cover vast open plains with sparse vegetation efficiently. Okay, so you had to cover long distances to find your food. Now here's an important fact. Tendons act largely as springs. They store energy. And muscles act primarily as tension generators. Okay, so when the muscle contracts, it's stretching the tendon, okay, and so it's generating tension in the spring, in the tendons. Okay, when the muscle contracts, it's stretching the tendons. So mammals generally experience higher metabolic rate faster they run. Okay. Macropods, kangaroos can hop at greater speeds without incurring significant higher expenditure. Okay, this is just an illustrative graphic. This is not actual data. Okay. So when you're running, energy cost increase with speed. Hopping is mostly efficient at high speed, but less efficient at low speed. Wallabies switch to walking when moving slowly. I guess animals are, biological systems are very smart. Okay. Yep.
Have you ever read the book Born to Run by Christopher McDougall?
No, but my buddy has highly recommended it. Yeah.
Very, very good.
All right.
That's how us as humans are actually, we're born to run.
Yeah. This is the guy who used to run 100 miles and stuff like that.
You know, about ultramarathons.
Yeah.
I've seen YouTube videos of those ultramarathon runners. Their feet are tore up and don't look healthy afterwards. I don't see how that seems like a good sport. I don't get it.
We got an ultramarathon here working here. Dr. Ron Eglin, he works at the ATC. He runs 100-mile races and stuff, 24-hour races. And, yeah. All right. So wallabies switch to walking when moving slowly. Okay. So you do adapt to the most efficient lifestyle. Okay. Biological systems won't waste energy unless they have to. Okay. When do you have to waste energy? When that lion is chasing you, or whenever if somebody is stealing your donut. All right. So running offers better stability and control when changing directions and on uneven ground. Okay. Hopping commits you to large ballistic leaps. So when you hop, you can't change direction in midair. Okay. And one hop is probably as good as your 15 steps. Okay. When you're taking 15 steps, you have 15 times, you have 15 occasions to change directions. When you're hopping, you threw those 15 options out the window. Yep. Runners can carry load while maintaining efficiency. Hoppers experience strain while carrying extra weight. Okay. So you can't put a backpack on a kangaroo. Okay, he can't go to school. So, but they do have a little pouch, and but the load they can carry is limited. Okay? So we did evolve to walk because it's much more efficient, it's much more versatile. Yeah? While it is inefficient at high speeds, but we're not all Usain Bolt, and Usain Bolt is not running all the time. Yeah. Yep.
No, but I mean, weren't we, before we became top of the food pyramid, weren't we easy prey back, millennia ago? I would think that we...
No, you had a supercomputer where you didn't have to just be all brawn, your brain and brawn.
Yeah, the reason why we survived over Neanderthals, Cro-Magnon man, everything is because we were highly deaf. Where like cavemen, they only hunted like the mammoths. We foraged, we hunted, we did everything.
We're also smart enough to bring everything that we need to us, so we don't have to run anymore.
Brain plus brawn is a good combination. Yeah. Lower mechanical stress. Okay. When you walk and run, you're alternating weight transfer on feet and stuff like that, and there's lower stress. Running spreads impact forces across both legs. Okay. In the next chapter, we'll see some of the forces that come into play. when you're walking and running and so on. Okay? Hopping puts repeated high loads on the Achilles tendon, knees, and hips. Versatility across terrain. Walking is more versatile than hopping. Okay? So again, in summary, hopping is extremely efficient for large animals, covering long distances at high speeds on open land. Its running is more versatile, better at low speeds, turning, carrying loads, and handling varied terrains. Okay? So this is what was suitable to us. Okay? Okay, Newton's third law. You might have heard of this law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Okay. So here's an interacting system. Here's a hammer interacting with a nail. When the hammer hits the nail, it exerts this force on the nail. Okay, and let's say the hammer exerts a 10-pound force on the nail. What Mr. Newton tells us is the nail will exert an equal and opposite force on the hammer. Okay, so if the hammer exerts a 10-pound force, the nail exerts a 10-pound force. If the hammer exerts a 15-pound force, the nail exerts a 15-pound force. How do you know the nail is exerting a force on the hammer? Do you have any evidence of it?
Because I've hit my thumb many times.
Yeah, but that your thumb is the nail.
So
How did you get even with the hammer is the question.
Sometimes the hammer will bounce back.
No. So when you hit a nail, the hammer stops. There had to be a force to stop the hammer. Okay? The hammer doesn't react. Ouch, you did. All right. All right. So Mr. Newton tells us for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. Okay. Forces are interactions. The hammer exerts a force on the nail. At the same time, the nail exerts a force on the hammer. Okay. All right, now we'll understand these two terms, mass and weight. Mass measures how much stuff there is in you. Weight is the force with which the planet you're standing on pulls on you. Okay, so your mass measures how much stuff there is in you, and your weight is the force with which Earth is pulling you down. So when I say my weight is 165 pounds, that's the force with which Earth is pulling me down. Okay, and no matter where I am, that's the force with which Earth will pull me down. Okay. Now, from Newton's third law, you also learned that that I'm pulling Earth with an equal and opposite force. Okay. All right. By the way, so weight is the magnitude of this force. So this is the force with which Earth is pulling me down. Weight is the magnitude, how hard it is pulling. Okay.
So what you're saying is I'm not fat, it's just too much gravity.
Right. Okay, so for instance, if you went to the moon, you would weigh 1/6 as less. Okay. On the moon, the pull is 1/6 that on Earth. But we just told you a trick. Just weigh yourself underwater. You'll be weightless. Okay.
That was the moon's total mass, 1/6 of the Earth's.
No, it's a combination of mass and size, but so your weight is your mass, which doesn't change no matter where you go, times the acceleration due to gravity on the surface. And the acceleration due to gravity on the surface of the moon is 1/6 that on Earth. The acceleration due to gravity on Earth is 9.8 meters per second squared. You might have heard of that. 10 meters per second squared. All right. So for instance, so if you jump straight up, okay, so V is the speed with which you can jump, and 2 times G is the acceleration due to gravity. So that's how high you can jump. Okay, that formula tells you how high you can jump. Okay, so
What are the letters at the end of 9.8?
meters per second squared. I mean, this extra stuff that I write, you don't need for the exam. It's just for personal edification. Okay. So here's the height you can jump if you jump at this speed. Okay. And this is the acceleration due to gravity. Okay. So my strength doesn't change. Okay. So let's say I can jump this high. Okay. If I went on the moon, I'd take off with the same speed. But since G is 1/6 as much, I could jump 6 times as high. So what I'm saying is, Michael Jordan here and me on the moon, Jordan doesn't have any chance. All right. So, in fact, this guy, so John Young jumped 2 feet straight up despite the fact that his suit weighed 180 pounds okay, so on the moon. I can jump higher than Michael Jordan. I could drive further than Tiger Woods. I'd be a super athlete.
At some point, somebody's gonna monetize basketball on the moon.
Right. All right, so there are 2 systems of units, in general, that are commonly used here. So the British system, PTU, and SI system, okay? So in the SI system, weight is measured in newtons after Mr. Newton, and in the British system, it's weight measured in pounds. And so 1 pound is 4.5, roughly 5 newtons, okay? 1 kg, so if you went to Europe and got on a scale, it'll read in kilograms. 1 kg is 2.2 pounds. Okay. So if you weighed 100 kgs, that would mean that you weigh 220 pounds. Okay. All right, now let's talk about apparent weight. Okay. So the weight of an object is the force of gravity on the object. Okay, so your real weight is the force with which the Earth pulls you. But this force you don't feel. Okay, so what is it that you feel? Okay, so when you're standing on Earth, the Earth is pushing you up, and that's why you're not falling through. And this is what you feel. This is what you feel, and this is your apparent weight. Okay? So that your apparent weight is the force with which the ground is pushing you up. Your apparent weight is the force with which your chair is pushing you up right now. Okay? So, your sensation of weight, how heavy you feel, is due to the contact forces supporting you and the response of your vestibular system to any motion. The vestibular system is in the inner ear that you heard about. Okay. Is the sensory system in the inner ear that provides your brain with information about motion and spatial orientation. You know. All right, so this is so in this example, you're in an elevator, which is accelerating upwards. So when you get in an elevator and it starts accelerating upwards, then there is the weight. The 2 forces acting on you is the force of gravity and the force with which the elevator is pushing you up. And the elevator has to push you up harder because you're accelerating upward. And Mr. Newton says the net force on you is your mass times acceleration. Since you're accelerating upward, there must be a force upward. So this has to be greater than this. Okay, so when the elevator accelerates up, you put a scale and stand on it, you will weigh more. Okay? Your weight will increase while it's accelerating upward. So, apparent weight is the force supporting you. So when you sit on a chair, your sensation of weight is due to the normal force exerted by the chair. When you stand, you feel the contact force of the floor pushing you up against your feet. Go underwater, and you might not have thought of this. Stand on the bottom of the pool. and you feel weightless. The floor is the floor is not pushing you up. Okay? Apparent weight can be measured by a scale, so apparent weight has real physical implications. Astronauts are nearly crushed by their apparent weight during rocket launches. Okay, so here's a rocket that's going up, and it can experience 6 to 7 g accelerations. Okay? 6g. What that means is, let's say if you're an astronaut and you're in this rocket, I'm just drawing it like this. Now the force with which the rocket has to push you is 1g is the Earth pulling you down, so 7 times your body weight. So if you're in this rocket, the rocket floor has to push you with the force of 7 times your body weight. Your joints and bones are not designed to do that. Now, I mean, if it lasts 30 seconds, yeah, okay, you'll survive that. You had to fly like that 10 minutes, nobody would be an astronaut. Okay? Well, nobody would be an astronaut and survive to live, tell the story, but, you know.
How do they train? They give them training.
Yeah.
So that their body gets used to the G-forces.
Yeah, and also then you place them in orientation where it stresses them the least. So you're laying down and stuff like that. Okay. Now you can't lay them down straight because why?
Their organs would squish.
No, you gotta make lots of rooms in the rocket, and then that's hard to launch and so on. Okay, so if you look at go to the Space Center, and they're sort of sitting, but the chair is horizontal. Yeah. All right. So you have to think of all of that. Okay. So now let me show you something. Before I explain this, let's look at a diagram. Okay. Okay, so let's say you're going in a circular road at constant speed. Okay. Are you accelerating?
Sometimes.
Okay, so you're accelerating all the time. This is velocity. Velocity is magnitude and direction. And you accelerate as long as your velocity is changing. So see, the direction of the velocity is changing. So you're constantly accelerating. And again, this is just, like I said, extra information. The acceleration is your speed square divided by the radius of the circle. You guys know that it's hard to make a sharp turn. That's because your acceleration, to make a sharp turn, R is smaller. When this is smaller, acceleration is greater. Okay? So you need greater forces to make the turn. Yeah. All right, so anyway, whenever you're going on a circular path, you need a force acting towards the center. All right, so now let's apply this to roller coaster rides. All right, so if you're going on a roller coaster like this, and you're going fast, of course, otherwise you wouldn't pay the $80 to get on that ride. Yeah. So here's your weight. Gravity never quits. But you see, you're going on a circular path, so you need a net force like this. And so the force in that direction, so that your apparent weight, okay, that is the push of this thing, has to be greater than that. And you can feel 2 and 3 G's, two times your body weight and stuff like that. When you come here, you're still moving, and gravity is providing you the centripetal force, okay? And your apparent weight is almost 0. Okay, so this is why you pay $80 for that ride. Here, you're feeling 3 times your body weight. Here, you're feeling almost weightless. Happens in a flash, okay? And so that's what you pay the money for. Okay, so much of the thrill ride of amusement park rides, such as roller coasters, come from rapid changes in your apparent weight. Okay, so they have to design these rides where they're exciting and safe. Yeah. Yeah. So as you saw, your sensation of weight is altered when you're submerged in water. You feel lighter because of the buoyant force. Okay. The supportive force of the water is called the buoyant force. This reduced apparent weight is the reason why many water-dwelling animals and plants have very soft bodies. So you bring this out of water and then, it won't survive. So underwater things don't require strong skeletons to maintain their body plans. Okay, so now we'll see when you can experience weightlessness. So we have already said you can experience weightlessness, so you just go underwater. Okay? So here's an elevator, and we saw this. When you're accelerating upwards, your apparent weight is higher than your actual weight because you need a net upward force to accelerate. Okay. When an elevator is at rest, when it's moving at constant velocity, your apparent weight is equal to your actual weight. When the elevator accelerates upward, your apparent weight is heavier. When it accelerates downward, you feel lighter. Okay? So here this diagram summarizes this. When your acceleration is 0, your apparent weight is equal to your actual weight. When you accelerate upwards, your apparent weight is greater than your actual weight. And when it accelerates downwards, your apparent weight is less than your actual weight. And look at this. If this were free falling, so if you get on an elevator and the cable gets cut, then you would be weightless. Okay, so if the elevator were free falling, and let's say you push off the floor of the elevator, you just float up. Yeah. You can, if an elevator is free falling, you drop an object, let go of an orange, and the orange would just float. For how long?
Until there's opposing force.
Until you hit the ground. So that thrill will last 2-3 seconds. Yep.
When you're in a high-rise building,
Mm-hmm.
is gravity affecting you less because of the extra distance between you and the earth at that point in time? Or is there any change in your apparent or true weight or any?
Well, there is a minuscule change. So if you're going on a height, the radius of the earth is 4,000 miles. Okay? So to see any effective change, this distance has to be comparable to that. Okay? So for instance, if you were 4,000 miles above the surface of the earth, then you would weigh 4 times less. So I would weigh 40 pounds. I weigh 160 pounds now. If I were 4,000 miles above the surface of the earth. Yeah. All right. So imagine a man in an elevator that's free falling. This man, he is also free falling. So when the elevator is falling, you're also falling inside the elevator. Okay. And if you stood on a scale, then the scale is not pushing you up because the effect of gravity is you're accelerating downwards, so the scale doesn't have to push you up. Okay, so you're falling with the same acceleration, and this is not pushing you up. The only force acting on you is the force of gravity. Okay, so from in this environment, you will feel weightless because you can move anywhere in there without applying any force, essentially. Okay, a small push off the floor would send him floating towards the top of the elevator. He feels weightless. Okay, you feel weightless relative to the environment. Okay, so to be weightless, you need to be free falling. Okay, so let me give you another example. Do you guys want to feel weightless? If you want to feel weightless, all we have to do is I have to pick up this room. If I pick up this room and throw it, while the room is in flight, everything in here will be weightless. Okay, so you have to be moving free falling. That's what free falling means. Okay, so let's say here's the room, and I throw it. When the room was traveling only under the influence of gravity, it's free falling. And while it's free falling, now you'll be weightless. Soon as the room hits the ground, suddenly you gain back your weight. Okay. So this is how astronauts train. Okay, so this is called a parabolic trajectory. Okay, so that's a trajectory on which a baseball would go if you threw it. And so if you fly a plane in that trajectory, that's not an easy thing to do. I mean, that's specialized plane. And so during this trajectory, you would be weightless inside the plane. Okay. And NASA has these planes, and each of these trajectories can last about 30 seconds. Anybody recognize this fellow? Yeah, very good. So you got to experience this. And there are clubs at Embry-Riddle where students get to do this. I mean, but you know. So in each flight they do 20 or 30 of these loops. Each trajectory lasts about 30 seconds. Okay. So the criterion to be weightless is to be in free fall. Okay. And if astronauts orbiting the Earth are in weightlessness, okay, so when somebody is in the International Space Station, you've seen all the astronauts, they are weightless. So the question is gravity not acting on them? No, gravity is acting on them. It's just that they're continuously falling. They're in free fall. It's like I picked up this room, I picked up the International Space Station, and I threw it. So this thing fell. Why isn't the International Space Station falling? Okay, so let me give you an example. Okay, so here, this keychain fell, right? Okay. Can I make it fall further? What I need to do?
Put more force on it.
Yeah, so launch it at a greater speed. It fell further. If I launch it at 5 miles a second, 8 kilometers a second, it will fall, but it's falling at the same rate the Earth is curving. Did you guys understand that? It'll never hit the ground. So that's what this diagram is showing. So I'll launch an object, I launch it at slow speed, it hits the ground. If I launch it at 8 kilometers a second, 5 miles a second, it's falling, but it's falling at the same rate the Earth is curving. So the astronauts are continuously falling. Okay? Except that because the Earth is not flat, they never hit Earth. Okay? So they're weightless. You're an astronaut inside the space station. You stand on a scale. What does the scale read? 0. Okay? Earth's gravity has not disappeared in space. Gravity is what holds the space station in orbit. So astronauts are moving under the influence of gravity, which is the definition of being free fall. Okay, so So when you're walking, you're interacting with the ground. Okay, so we'll talk about interaction with surfaces. Okay, so here you're interacting with the ground. Okay, and the ground exerts two kinds of forces. It'll exert a force that is perpendicular to the surface and a force that is parallel to the surface. Okay, so here's what this thing is showing you. So this person is trying to walk, and what does this person do? So if I'm trying to walk, what do? I push on the floor. And if my foot slipped, then I couldn't walk. Okay, so how do I walk? I'm pushing on my floor, pushing on the floor. The friction force is not letting my foot slip, and that is what's propelling me. Okay, if I want to walk faster, what needs to happen? This force needs to become greater. Okay. So if I wear slippery shoes, can I walk faster? No. I have to wear sticky shoes to walk faster. You guys might have seen this. Have you seen drag racing? Okay. In drag racing, you're trying to cover a quarter mile as fast as possible. And
The track is sticky, the tires are sticky, everything's sticky.
Yeah. So before they go on their quarter mile, what do? They burn their tires.
Eat 'em up.
Eat them up to make it stickier so you can have a greater friction force. And I'll tell you exactly what they're trying to do in a second. Okay, so surface interactions are two basic types: perpendicular to the surface, normal force, and those parallel to the surface, friction forces. Okay? So this is the normal force, and that's the. So here's a consequence of friction. Okay. So you have joints where things move against each other. Okay. And how long do those joints have to last? A lifetime. And if friction increases, that hurts. Okay. So of course you have things to minimize friction. It's fluid filled and there's cartilage to minimize friction. And so if this cartilage wears away for whatever reason, the bone rubbing against bone, your brain will get that message. Okay. Your nerves will tell you it hurts. Okay. So this is osteoarthritis. When the protective cartilage wears off, that's osteoarthritis. There's another kind of arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, but it's an autoimmune disease. Okay. And your body itself attacks the lining there. Okay. So the body's immune system attacks the synovium, the lining of the membranes that surround the joints. It causes chronic inflammation along with joint swelling and pain. Okay. So you can't mess with the lubrication. You want something to function smoothly, the lubrication better be there. And
That's what she said.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to, I'm sorry.
yeah, that's remember your so. All right, now let's talk about friction, static friction. Okay, so friction is when two surfaces interact. Okay. So let me show you. All right, so here's this box sitting on the ground. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm pushing this box with a force of 15 newtons. This box is not moving. So what's happening? There's a friction force in the opposite direction. Okay? And since this box is not moving, it's called a static friction force. So what is the static friction force now? 0. See, you see this, as I'm pushing harder and harder, the static friction force is keeping up with it. How's that static friction force coming back? What is happening? Yep.
The atoms of both the box and the floor are sticking together.
And pulling, okay? And exactly, okay? And they pull as hard as is needed. But for every surface, there's going to be a maximum static friction force, okay? They can only pull so hard. So I haven't reached the maximum static friction force yet. Okay? So the static friction force is that much. There you go. Okay? So you see that static friction force can be anything. So friction forces are denoted by small f. So the subscript S telling you it's a static friction force. We'll talk about another friction force, which is the kinetic friction force, which has a subscript K. Okay? So the static friction force can be anywhere from 0 to a maximum value. And the maximum value is mu s times the normal force. Okay? And so there's the normal force. Here's your weight, and there's the normal force. Okay, so when nothing is pushing you down, the normal force is just your weight. And so the static friction force is mu s times your weight, mass times gravity. Okay? That's the maximum static friction force. So in that drag racing, when you burn the rubber, this number is called the coefficient of friction. It tells you the stickiness of the two surfaces. When you burn the number, what you're trying to do is increase the value of this number. Because you can't change your weight. You change the stickiness of the two surfaces, the maximum static friction force increases, and then you can launch, accelerate faster. Okay. So if you're trying to push in this direction, static friction force pushes in this direction. If you try and push in this direction, static friction forces push in the opposite direction. Friction forces always act in the opposite direction of the tendency to move or the direction in which you're moving. So the static friction force is less than or equal to this maximum force, maximum static friction force. So there's a maximum static friction force between two surfaces. When a force greater than this maximum is applied, the object starts moving. Okay, so these things are called the coefficient of friction between surfaces. They essentially tell you how sticky the two surfaces are. Okay. So rubber on concrete, there's this number. Okay. Whenever they provide you tables like this, somebody's gone to a lot of trouble to come up with these numbers. And you only go to trouble when it is useful. Okay. So why do we have this number for rubber on concrete? Does this play in your life? All the time. When you're driving. Okay. So this number tells you it's related to stopping distance. Okay. If you lock your brakes, this is the stickiness you're using. Smaller the number, greater the braking distance. So when you have anti-locking braking system, this is the number you're using. Okay. So you'd stop 20% faster when you have anti-locking braking system. Okay. All right, I'll give you one bit of information here. What this number means is the following. So if you have a 100-pound rubber block sitting on concrete, so this is 100 pound. What this number means is you need 100 pounds to get it moving. You need 100-pound force to get it moving. And what this number tells you is you need 80 pounds to keep it moving once you start it moving. Okay, so that's what that number means. This is rolling friction. Okay, we'll come to that in a second. Okay. Have you guys ever walked on ice? Okay. How do you walk on ice?
Very slowly, very short steps.
Very
Try
ginger.
to keep your center of gravity above your feet.
Why not? Why can't you walk like that?
You just slip.
You'd slip. All right. So let's see why you would do. Okay. So there's the force of friction. It's a static friction force. And this is small. The maximum value of that is small because the mu(s) for ice is small. Okay. So when you're pushing down on the floor, there's the force with which you push down. This component of the force is being balanced by the static friction force. So if you push with too large an angle, this won't be able to keep up and you would slip. Okay? So when this is small, like when you're walking on ice, this angle has to be small. Okay? So when you're walking on ice, the maximum you can have is 8.5 degrees, and that's the small steps. Okay. If you walk on concrete, this can be 45 degrees. You can walk like that. Kinetic friction force, that's the friction force when you're moving. Okay, so once you are moving, there's the kinetic friction force. Okay, once you're moving. Now this kinetic friction force is always smaller than the maximum static friction force. Okay, so once you get an object moving, then it's easier to keep it moving. Okay? So if you're pushing something, you don't want to start and stop. Once you get it going, you want to keep it going. Kinetic friction forces are independent of the velocity of the object, so it doesn't matter how fast it's moving to a certain extent. Okay? The friction force are independent of that. And the kinetic friction force is the coefficient of kinetic friction, that's the stickiness of the two surfaces, times the normal force. Okay, rolling friction. So when a wheel rolls, the wheel deforms, and you see these forces, that's the force the ground is exerting on the wheel, and this effectively acts as a friction force. So here is the friction force when an object is rolling. Here's the friction force, and this friction force is the rolling friction coefficient times the normal force. They all have the same form. And now let's look at the table. Okay, so kinetic friction force is if an object is sliding. If an object is rolling, this is the friction force. And look at this. This is only 0.02. That's 0.8. So that means the rolling friction force, 0.08 would be 10%, 0.02 is 2.5%. This friction force is 2.5% than the friction force. So if you had to transport something if you had to push a cart, let's say you're pushing a cart and you're exerting so much effort, then let's say about 2,000 years ago, or maybe 5,000 years ago, you suddenly invented the wheel. What happened?
You need much less force.
Yeah, so if you had 100% effort, now it's 2.5% effort. So that's what the wheels did for you. So when the Egyptians had to transport those heavy rocks up when they were building the pyramids, what did they do?
Trees.
Use rollers. Yeah. All right. Okay, so what causes friction? Two surfaces, no matter how smooth they are, there's always they're always rough. And these points of contact, the atoms bind them. There's a attractive force between them. So if this surface is trying to move in this direction, these atoms clinging on are pulling in that direction. If this surface wants to move in this direction, the atoms are pulling in that direction. And that's what causes friction. Okay? And of course, you see, the more atoms that are in contact, the greater the friction force. How can you increase the number of atoms that are in contact? If you press down on the surface, okay, heavier this object, more atoms will be in contact. Okay, so that's why friction forces are proportional to the normal force. By the way, here's an interesting fact. So when two surfaces are in contact, the actual surface that is in contact is only 1 part in 10,000. Okay, so let's say I put this computer on the surface. The actual area of contact is about the tip of this pen. Okay. So again, how can I increase this friction force? So there's a friction force. I can increase this friction force by pressing down on it. The friction force increases. What happened when I press down on it? More atoms were in contact. That's all. Okay. All right, guys. So we are going to